Smith determined document 217 was gone. Again, she should have called in Brockfeld. Instead, as a congressional report would later describe it, Smith and her staff started second-guessing themselves. They convinced themselves they might have made a mistake and number 217 never existed.
You have the former National Security Advisor, and nobody could believe that he was taking documents.
Keith Osbrook was the chief counsel for a congressional committee that would later investigate the Berger theft.
And I think people just thought it was a big mistake.
But the big mistake was what Smith did next. She actually printed out another copy of the document 217 and gave it back to Berger, stating that it had somehow been missing from the files. As Berger would later admit to investigators, he should have known Nancy Smith was onto him. At this point, he admitted, the bomb should have burst in the air, but obviously it did not. No, it did not. As unbelievable as it sounds, Sandy Berger then decided to steal the document Smith just gave him. In other words, to steal the same document twice. Berger then told Smith he had to make another phone call.
She went out to the secretarial desk, and on the secretarial desk is a secretarial phone. She looked over and noticed the light was not on.
So he wasn't using the phone?
Well, she became suspicious. She opened her door and walked in, at which point he appeared to be alarmed, and as she put it, he mowed her down.
But she still didn't call Brockfeld.
What Berger did next wouldn't become known until much later. It shows the lengths to which Berger was willing to go as he compromised our nation's security. As Berger stepped out onto Pennsylvania Avenue, he had with him a stack of stolen documents about this thick, hidden somewhere on his body. He walked over to 9th Street. Now, at the time, the archives was undergoing renovation. There was a construction trailer right over there. According to Berger, he first looked up and down the street, then up at the windows of the archives, then over at the Justice Department across the street. Not seeing anybody, he folded up the documents and placed them underneath the trailer. Then he went back into the archives, essentially leaving top secret documents basically out in the street.
By definition, those are highly classified documents that if they fell into the hands of our enemies would do damage to the national security of the country.
Later, Berger retrieved the stashed documents and returned to his own office. He would later admit cutting some of them up with scissors into tiny pieces. Back at the archives, Nancy Smith and her staff waited another day to see what Berger had taken, and it was worse than they thought. In addition to document 217, they found two other versions of the Millennium Alert After Action Review were missing. These were text emails with a report attached. According to the congressional report, Smith would state, quote, "My staff and I were almost physically ill with the discovery of the missing emails." But still, they did not call law enforcement. They went to Berger himself.
If you ask the guy who's stolen the documents to give them back, he might not give you back the same stuff.
I would not have trusted the thief.
And Berger lied, repeatedly. First, he said archive staff must have lost the papers. Then he admitted he took some home inadvertently. Then he explained that he mistakenly destroyed and discarded some of the documents.
Did that not shock the people that he told?
Apparently not enough to contact the Office of Inspector General.
They still hadn't contacted you.
No.
That call would come a week later.
And what did you think?
God, you should have come to me quicker. We now have an individual that could have been caught with appropriate law enforcement techniques, filmed, handcuffed, etc., that the opportunity's gone.
And what about the archive staff, whose many errors of judgment enabled Berger to commit the crimes and severely compromise the ability of investigators to figure out what he'd stolen and what damage it had done? Well, some received written reprimands, which we're told were later erased from their personnel files.
But by the spring of 2004, with the 9/11 Commission in full swing, Brockfeld had more important things to worry about.
I now have concerns that we may not have full production to the 9/11 Commission.
In other words, did Berger withhold vital information from the 9/11 Commission?